Good afternoon, everyone. Call the meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 101 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans. This meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to standing orders. Before we proceed, I would like to make a few comments for the benefit of witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen, either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can choose the earpiece and select the desired channel. Please address all comments through the chair. And a reminder before we proceed, I simply want to remind members to be very careful when handling their earpieces, especially when your microphone or your neighbor's microphone is turned on. Earpieces placed too close to the microphone are one of the most common causes of sound feedback, which is extremely harmful to the interpreters and causes serious injuries. Pursuant to Standing Order 108.2 and the motion adopted on February 15th, the committee is resuming its study on the scales used by the Department of Fisheries and Oceans to set redfish quotas. I'll just notify the members that the clerk has informed me the notice of meeting that went out showed that we would be moving to committee business at 5:15 p.m. I've been informed we can extend the witness testimony time until 5:30 p.m. and then begin committee business at 5:30 until 5:45, possibly 6 p.m. Okay, thank you. For our first panelist today, we have from the Fédération Régionale Académique de Pêcheurs Professionnels, Mr. Jean Latang. If you could, for 5 minutes or less, please, to your opening statements.
I'm sure you do hear me well. Yes, you do? Great. Thanks to all. Merci beaucoup et surtout un grand merci.
Thank you very much for organizing this meeting. Thank you, Mr. Serge Cormier, for inviting us to appear. First of all, a short flashback where, as soon as the small redfish appeared in the summer of 2011, we immediately sounded the alarm button to DFO and told them that we were going to have significant issues in our fishery shrimp industry if we did not act immediately. DFO's only action was to pull out of the drawers a closure protocol for small fish, and for years 2012 to 2015, our shrimp fishers were forced to concentrate their fishing efforts in areas where there were no or few small redfish. It was not important to protect the shrimp. As you have seen on the table, from the spring of 2016, there were comments made about the negative effects on Gulf Stream stocks. Even though we have insisted in each of those years that we allow a redfish fishery in an attempt to reduce shrimp predation, it has always gone unanswered. Now, came into force 2019, Bill C-68. This was supposedly modernized in order to achieve new objectives and thus ensure the sustainability of our fisheries. Allow me to quote one of the points sought in this legislation. For our communities, it will keep the benefits of the fishery in the hands of independent fishers and their region. Not only has this done no good to protect our shrimp stocks, but the same is true for the recent allocation of redfish quotas, where it is clear that DFO has ignored its own legislation. In the licensing policy section 6 and 7, I'm drawing your attention to it, and I've attached an excerpt. It is stated that there is no right for anybody with a license. The minister has full discretion to issue a fishing license without regard to history, and the same is true for the allowances attached to those permits. Minister Le Boutilé's announcement on January 26 that she's returning to the history of the past 30 years does not hold water. We have to pay attention to Section 7, which gives the guiding principles for awarding these permits. Reading the 9 points in the subsection, it is even more difficult to understand how the minister did not take all of these factors into account in the red fish quota allocations. You may also recall Anglehart and Alcott case before Justice Gagné, which clearly established this issue of ownership and distribution. Now, the reality and situation. Yesterday, we received the administrative list of allocations for the Gulf Stream quotas based on the 3,060 TAC announced by the minister. The highest allocation for us is 48 MT. The second part of the minister's announcement allocates a 10% quota of red fish reserved for shrimpers. Let's see what this can result in. Let's be a bit positive and go for a red fish TAC of 100,000 tons without going into details for our fishermen with the highest stream allowance, 125 per pound and at a price of 40 cents per pound for redfish. We would have an income potential of $220,000. Only the fixed operating cost of a shrimp boat are on average $175,000. It is therefore impossible to operate under such conditions. What's the solution? Turn to the processing plants to whom the minister has given the vast majority of redfish allocations in order to obtain a quota in sufficient quantity to make ends meet. For fishing enterprises of less than 65, in our opinion, this violates the law of the owner-operator. For those of more than 65 feet, it is a return to the last century when American and European processors controlled fleets, factories, and markets. The story tells us that Ministers Leblanc, father and son, have both worked very hard to put an end to this practice. Today, it's back to the future. How can we, as minister, as a department, as a government, force our fishing companies to break the law, or even worse, submit to the control of companies that will decide who, when, where, at what price the harvesters will be able to go fishing? Soon, these harvesters will have no choice but to sell their fishing enterprises to these companies or be entirely under their control. These companies will immediately open their arms wide to them because they need their fishing effort. But that is throwing the independent fish harvesters into the wolf's mouth. In our opinion, this is a case for litigation against DFO. It makes no sense to put in place conditions such as the current situation that force our fishing enterprises to commit illegal acts in an attempt to survive, especially when it's a law from the same department. Over the past few years, our coalition of shrimpers from New Brunswick, Quebec, and the west coast of Newfoundland has asked all successive ministers, Leblanc, Wilkinson, Jordan, Murray, Lubutilier, to have priority access to the opening of this redfish with a minimum TAC of 225,000 millitons. We have also asked to be the only ones to fish this resource for the first 2 years in order to allow producers to develop a market for this redfish, which is in competition with Norway and Iceland in particular, and thus allow gradual entry. In 2018, Minister Leblanc made public commitments to this effect. We have also indicated many times to department staff that we need £2 million per fishing operation to ensure profitability. The 25,000 tons being a starting quota. Our requests have been repeated several times without any response. Thank you for listening to us. We are exhausted. Thank you, sir.
Now to our second witness today, and we do only have 2 witnesses in this hour. Now from the Quebec Office of Shrimp Fishermen, Mr. Patrice Element. I hope I've pronounced that correctly.
Thank you very much. Do you hear me? Do you hear me? Yeah.
Yes,
okay,
we do.
Enough. Oh, thank you. So, thank you very much to everyone to allow us to present our point of view on that thing. So, allow me to switch to French. Pour l'allocation des quotas de
For redfish, DFO has decided to respect the principle in the past, whereas redfish harvesting could clearly be considered new fishing, depending on the criteria established by its own policies on new fisheries. The allocation that was done doesn't respect the principles and criteria of the framework established for providing new access, a new guideline from DFO. Legally, Could DFO run counter to its own policies? I do not have the legal expertise to make that determination, but that question can be asked. Let's now talk about the boats that received a large part of the quota. When we talk about mature offshore boats, we are talking about boats that use a lot of fuel, not only to move and fish, but also to operate their fleet. So these are transformed into factories that use wind energy. So the potential other the impact of this is more than that used by harvesters. They would use 100% fossil fuels, whereas fish, if fished by harvesters, will be transformed by using energy from renewable sources. In Quebec, and most of it will be in Quebec factories, and more than 70% of this in New Brunswick. In this context, the decision by the minister runs counter to the ministerial strategy for sustainable strategy adopted by the minister. This runs counter to the part on reducing greenhouse gases that is part of the minister's mandate letter. Without exaggeration, we could say that the decision runs counter to the legislation that requires us to protect the ecosystem. We all know that the shrimp biosystem is no longer the same and that we can no longer support the industry and the communities can no longer be supported. But the possibility of replacing shrimp harvesting with redfish harvesting will allow people surviving from it, First Nations people, people in Quebec, in Newfoundland, New Brunswick, they can hope for a better day when these new fisheries take up and processors develop or conquer more profitable markets. The announcement made by the minister on the 26th of January came to confirm what we were all expecting when it comes to shrimp, but it also means that it's the end for shrimpers in the Gulf. And now we are giving an opportunity to others who will continue to prosper without quotas and provide very little profit to communities. Communities like Rivière-au-Nord in Quebec, Saint-Antoine in Terre-Neuve, and communities in New Brunswick as well, for whom fishery and shrimp harvesting is a main economic driver and who will maybe need alternatives to avoid economic disaster. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Alemán, and thank you both for appearing today. We will now turn to our first round of questions, starting with Mr. Small for the Conservatives.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank the witnesses for coming out today to take part in this important study. Monsieur Alemán, having been an independent owner, operator in the inshore fleet in Newfoundland and Labrador myself, I certainly know what it's like to go through hard times and to experience the effects of decreasing prices for the product and quota cuts and whatnot. And what's the experience of the typical shrimp harvester now in your region of the Gulf of St. Lawrence? What are they going through right now?
Well, the last 2 years have been extremely difficult because of, well, the reduced quotas, the lower biomass, the much lower catch rates, and the market difficulties. Cold water shrimp has not been, the market for cold water shrimp has not been as good since the pandemic as it's been for snow crab and lobster, for example. Plus, the cost of fuel has hurt us very much. It's fair to say that I'll let Mr. Landing speak for New Brunswick, but it's fair to say that most of our harvesters in the last 2 years have lost hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's been extremely difficult. And again, we knew that 2024 would be even more difficult. But before the decision of the minister, we had some hope that on the midterm, on the long term, significant allocation of redfish will allow us to pull our head out of the water. excuse the bad play on words, but the decision made to allow most of the redfish quota to offshore companies, because we're not talking about harvesters here, we're talking about companies. The decision to allow most of the redfish quotas to offshore companies has more or less killed our future.
So the effect on the harvesters of the decline in the shrimp's been pretty bad by what you're saying. How's this affecting the folks who live in coastal adjacent communities throughout the Gulf, who make a living in processing shrimp in the onshore processing plants?
I will give you the example of our community, Rivière-au-Nord, Fox River, and Gaspé. Rivière-au-Nord is a community of about 4,000 people. If you include the two processing plants, the harvesters themselves, the captains and the crew, plus the services like the shops and the welding shops and the electronic shops, just in Rivière-au-Nord, 4,000 people, communities of 4,000 people. We are talking in Rivière-au-Nord of between 400 and 425 jobs that would disappear if there's no shrimp fishing and processing anymore. So it's a catastrophic. Put it on the scale of like Quebec City, we're talking about 80,000 jobs.
Thank you. So what do you think the number one factor is in the decrease of the shrimp biomass in the Gulf of St. Lawrence?
Okay, everyone agrees that the three factors are predation by redfish, higher water temperature, and lower oxygen content. There's people don't agree on which one is the most important factor. But if you're asking me what I think personally, I think that the predation by redfish is the most important factor, given the fact that the one area where the stock is in relative good health, the estuary zone in the Gulf, one of the four areas, the one area where the biomass is in better shape is the one area where there's little or no redfish.
Of all groups negatively impacted by the rise of the redfish biomass, of all the groups that sought after quota, who would be the most negatively impacted?
The shrimp? The shrimpers. Without a doubt.
So the minister's right hand was here at the last committee meeting, Adam Burns, and was asked at that meeting how much redfish would be required by the typical owner-operator enterprise to make them viable. Did I just hear you say that it was about 1,000 tons per enterprise?
Sorry, can you say that again?
The amount of redfish that would be required by the typical enterprise to make them viable right now. Did I hear you say that it's about 2 million pounds?
Yeah, Mr. Lantang said that.
Oh, I'm sorry. Do you agree with Mr. Lantang?
Yes.
Well, we would need a much more significant amount of what we have now and what we can hope in the future with only 10% of the allocation. I would say that something in the range of 1 million pounds or 2 million pounds would be, and again, it depends a lot of factors, the cost of operation and the price that we get.
So
sorry.
I've got one more question I want to get in here right now.
9 seconds, Mr.
Do you think the minister has done everything that she can to work on behalf of the owner-operators in the Gulf of St. Lawrence to develop this redfish fishery, knowing that biomass has been swelling since the early, say around 2012, 2013, they realized it was there. Do you feel that this minister has lived up to her responsibility to owner-operators in the Gulf of St. Lawrence?
We'll have to leave it up to the...
What's being done
Sorry,
is
we'll have to leave it up to you
late.
to answer in a further round. You're well over time there, Mr. Small. Thank you. We'll go on to our next questioner now from the Liberal side, Mr. Cormier, online.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur Lantin.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Lantain. Thank you all for being here. I know that these are difficult moments. We had the opportunity to meet with you, Mr. Lantain, recently. We had the opportunity to brainstorm. I don't have enough time. I have only 6 minutes. This is what I want to do. I would like to know what type of assistance do you need? I'll start with my first question, Mr. Lantain. How much do you evaluate the need in pounds or in tons that each shrimp harvester should have? Answer. According to the minister's plan, well, the minister's plan doesn't work and will not work. And if we want to put things in perspective, we need to totally forget about shrimp. As I said, the initial first 25 tons is something we wanted exclusively for shrimp farmers. But to respond to your specific question, what it would require in tons? Well, for some time, the red fish was 45 cents per pound. So 2 million tons is $45,000,000. Now we are getting to a levels where our shrimp harvesters can survive. So to answer, we need about 2 million tons of red fish. So now, if we don't have that, what do we need as help to survive in the long term? Well, that you're taking me to the second question. Talking about increasing the quota, what other type of assistance, guarantees, programs, because we are not only talking about owners, workers in the industries, captains, all those who rely on stream, what type of assistance plan do you need? If the situation doesn't change, it is clear that, in our opinion, there will be no shrimp harvesters in Atlantic Canada who will be able to function. They will need a program for buying back their permits. We've started working with our collaborators. Now, these people will do whatever they can to try, and these are people for whom fishing is dear to their hearts. They'll try to make sure that they survive. If it doesn't work, we need to buy back the permits. We need to go back to square one, see what we were doing before, find a compromise price with the department. Now, that could solve the case of the owners of the fishing operations. What about those working? What about the crew members? What will happen to them? Well, this week we heard Mr. Burns say that he was working with other departments. Well, the panacea is not the solution. We need to rethink the plan totally, in my opinion, and collaborate with the department to provide those shrimp allocations, or rather redfish allocations, to people who really need it. Mr. Element, Mr. Lantain, you may comment later on, if you will. Even if you have your 25,000 tons or 50,000 tons or 100,000 tons, whatever the number is, redfish fishing is supposed to reopen on the 15th of May. If we cannot capture, transform, and sell these products, even if you have 100,000 tons, I want you to tell us, and you've started, Mr. Element, what type of assistance should we consider to help the industry, for this industry to overcome these difficult times, so that we can still have all these people working in the industry? Answer. For me, and this is my personal opinion, for me, the main issue is not necessarily what we have this year, what we will not have as quotas in 3 years or 5 years. Well, this is something has been repeated, and many interveners in the industry have recognized this, both amongst harvesters and processors. There is a market and a fishing and processing capacity that we can develop. What we need to do, and Mr. Lantain mentioned that, is something that the Quebec harvesters have been saying for a long time. Let's start progressively to be able to develop our capacity to harvest in a responsible way. And for processors, they need to be able to equip themselves to carry out major processing and to transform the market. Yes, given the context, and as Mr. Lantin said, our people want to continue harvesting. They want to continue doing what they like, what they do well. Now, something else was mentioned by Mr. Lantin. It's true that in a context where over the last 2 years have been very difficult, extremely difficult, if we are able to have enough redfish to hope that we can continue in the long term, we also need to think about temporary measures to help us survive. Mr. Element, Mr. Lantin, that is why for us as a committee and also for people who are listening to what you need, it's important for you to give us figures.
Thank you, Mr. Cormier. That's actually your 6 minutes right there. If the witnesses wish to reply in response to further questions, they're able to do that. We'll move on now to Madame Debien, MP Debien.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I'm delighted. And I want to thank my colleagues around the table for giving me the opportunity to take this initiative to carry out an emergency study on the crisis that shrimp harvesters in our region are encountering, and also those from Acadia. I want to thank our witnesses for being here. It's much appreciated. I know many people are listening to us as well. Mr. Element, you talked about a new fishery for redfish. When you talk about the new fishery, you are talking about a new perspective. This means a new way of doing things for you and for the department. Is that what you mean when you talk about new fishery with new quotas that will not rely on historic quotas? Yes, exactly. In its policy on new fisheries, DFO defines a new fishery, and I quote, as a fishery that has to do with new stocks and or species that are not used or underutilized and not currently included in a management plan. So clearly, I'm not a legal expert, but clearly redfish harvesting meets all these criteria. So DFO did not have to respect the principle of historic quotas. We're dealing with new fishery. It's a choice that the government has made, that the DFO and the minister have made for reasons we do not understand and which defies all logic and all political criteria and all policies that DFO had established. Yes, that is what we mean when we talk about new fishery. We think, or rather, it is a new fishery, and this should be considered as such. And indeed, from the time when we start harvesting, we should rethink or redefine the way we work. Thank you. When you talk about temporary or interim measures, you are not just talking about the rights or helping out with redfish. You need a plan for marketing and so on, maybe investing new money. So when you talk about these interim measures as a priority, what are you talking about? Mr. Lantin may add to what I say, but we have harvesters who have gone through very difficult years. The fishing sector, by definition, is variable. There are good years, there are bad years. So, but there should be a balance. But for shrimp harvesters, over the last 2 years, they have had a very difficult time. So we should reasonably expect that people should have some hope to see good years and expect better years. But now we have just gone through 2 very difficult years. 2024 is going to be another difficult year. And there's no company in fishing or elsewhere that could deal with such deficits and still continue to expect to survive. Yes, there should be investments for fishing and processing, and we do hope that the various levels of government will be there to help. But the accounts are empty. Many harvesters are going through a technical bankruptcy, so to speak, because when redfish harvesting and processing will become sustainable, people in Quebec and elsewhere hopefully should still be alive to be able to fish the redfish. Mr. Lantagne.
Apparently Mr. Latin lost power, possibly because of the storm taking place, so if we can just suspend for a few minutes to see if we can get him back online.
Mr. Chair, same thing here. I think I was like cut off or froze. Same thing happened here. We just like lost everything. So
yes, you were right at the end of your 6 minutes, Mr. Cormier.
Yeah.
So I advised the witnesses that if they wish to answer back to your question, they
Perfect.
could in further. So
thank you.
back to you, Ms. MP Debian.
I guess I forgot to pay the electricity bill here recently.
Il me restait
There's no more money in the bank, so.
Oui,
You have 2 minutes remaining.
merci. Je voudrais signifier justement à nos témoins.
Thank you. I'm telling the witnesses that I have 2 minutes left. Mr. Lantagne, I would like you to complete your comments On the question I asked, I don't know if you heard my question. Unfortunately not. I'm just coming back. I missed the question. The interim measures, what do you mean? What we need to do with these redfish allocations, that if we can obtain them, we should ensure guarantees that profitability, or at least the minimum income, should be obtained to ensure survival of the industry. There should be follow-up. Mr. Comey was asking what it takes. We don't know, because we don't know what the price we will have on the market, but we need accompanying measures. We need a support fund to at least help us not only achieve profit, but a break-even point, or at least remain afloat, at least. Very quickly, some countries are harvesting the redfish and they have a market. Will it not be a good idea to refer to those countries, see how they function, how their market has been developed? I have had the opportunity personally to go to Iceland and to see how they work. And we were well received. They took us to their factories, they received us in their cafeterias, and they served us coffee. That's all. So, in other words, thank you for coming, but we can't share our secrets with you. No. Clearly, that was the message we got. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Debian. We'll go on to now Ms. Barron, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. My first question that I have, perhaps it could be for Mr. Lantien. My question is around the changeover from fishing northern shrimp to fishing for redfish. I'm just wondering if you can share a little bit more about the costs associated with that, the gear changes, and what that looks like in principle.
Yes. As you know, they are already a trawler boat. So it is basically a switch in the trawling equipment itself. So it's a question of a new net. And of course, it does mean some changes on deck. Right now, they have a separator on board, most of them, to remove smaller fish between for the shrimp. So this has to be removed, and there's some material that has to be changed there. But there's no major change there. The winches are the same. The trawl door will probably be the same. So the big equipment is a new set of net, and the actual figure that we have is anywhere between 100,000 to 150,000 per boat in order to do that transition.
Thank you. That's a big cost. I'm wondering what you're hearing from those out on the water around the implications of those costs.
Well, it is a big cost, and we've been said by the managers of the AFF fund that we could access that fund for that purposes. So at least there's that possible help from that program at DFO. Is there some money in their fund, sufficient fund for everybody? That's another part of the equation. But we've been said that we could access that. Now we could. And obviously, we're not going to start spending money that right now the guys don't have, and they're not going to do that for the minimum quota that we've been allocated. It just doesn't make sense at all there to purchase a set of new gear to do one trip or two trips. Doesn't work.
And so what do you think might happen then if people can't afford to make this change and the quota is not high enough to sustain or justify this change? What do you think the options will be left remaining to those?
There's minimal options there. and you'll see two things basically, both remaining on the boatyard, not going underwater. For the guys that can at least wait maybe a year or so, and the other case is for sale affair. Basically, that's what it is. I mean, there's no way out. There's no other solution that is possible for them. There's no other resources that they can access. So just plainly doesn't make sense that our own government is forcing fishermen selling their enterprise and on the other hand giving quotas to companies that don't need that. It's pure nonsense.
And so if the quota was increased for those who are local, for the local fishers, what would that look like as far as, switching over to the redfish fishery? What would be the changes to fishers that would have to be considered as far as their day-to-day? I'm not a fisher, so I don't know what that would look like in principle. So what are some of the considerations if that redfish fishery were increased in quota to the local fishers? Do you feel that this is a sustainable fishery to move over to? Do you think that this will produce economic benefits for fishers moving forward? I'd like to get your thoughts on that, please.
Yes. Okay. Well, it's like if you're playing cards and you just have one or two left in your hand. So you don't have that many choice. And the only option that we had, the first one was shrimp, which is basically gone. Second one is redfish. And in doing that, the option that we're trying to work with some staff at VFO is let's start with some quotas and then like Mrs. Desbiens was asking, is there a way that we could work out a plan to maximize that resource, get a better revenue out of it? Right now, we're talking about 40 cents a pound, but we do firmly believe that let's the industry work, and we're damn sure that we can work out a plan to get a better price for that fish. But right now, we're going to start with a fish which is very small, basically used for bait. And before we do develop some potential market, we need to work in that, and quality becomes an issue there.
I only have 15 seconds left, so I'm not going to do that to you, but I appreciate the information you've provided.
Okay, sure, Mrs. Barron. Very nice.
Thank you, MP Barron. We'll move on to our next round now with Mr. Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And 5 minutes. Let me start the clock here. There we go. Thank you, witnesses. I'd like to start off. We're just a quick answer. I believe both of you have been involved in some elements of this DFO consultation process, which I guess is continuing next week.
Yes. You said a quick question.
That's perfect.
A quick reply.
Monsieur Lemont?
Yes.
Merci. So we had, as you probably watched when we had DFO officials here earlier this week, and we've questioned on this issue, a lot of us have, on whether or not the 25,000 that the minister mentioned as sort of her minimum in the news release was enough, and that it appeared from all the documents I've seen that have been shared at those committees that the science has said that it could be anywhere from 88 kilotons to 312 kilotons.
Yes.
Is it your understanding that range is a range that would be done sort of within that range year after year the next few years, or was that just a single year level?
Tu y vas-tu, Jean, ou chaud?
Vas-y,
Okay.
Patrice.
We all, and I'm pretty sure that Jean will concur with me. We all know, and we've said that we need to develop that fishery gradually in order for all the reasons mentioned before. And the issue for us in my humble opinion, is not what we're going to have to harvest this year, is what we're going to have to harvest in 3 or 4 years down the road. And to come back to the answer that Jean gave to Mrs. Barron, we need to develop, we need to have enough quota and to justify the required investments, which, by the way, are much lower for shrimpers than anybody else. But,
I appreciate that. So if I could follow up on that specific point that you made, I think it was you or Mr. B, Monsieur Letang, said 1 million, 2 million pounds would be needed as sort of a minimum for viable.
Yes.
If that's the case, how many license holders that would be, and so how much overall quota would that be required as a minimum for this year for economic viability just for the inshore?
At this point, we have about, if we include First Nations, we have between 80 and 90 shrimp licenses in the Gulf. At the actual price of 40 cents, the number quoted by Mr. Lane Lantang of 2 million pounds is probably accurate. Not probably, is about what we would need. But like Jean said, we all hope, and I firmly believe that in 3 or 4 years down the road, we're going to be able to increase significantly the price of that fish, which will mean that we would probably require less fish on the long run in order to be profitable.
Appreciate that, but with that amount just on the inshore, that would require a couple $100 million just to be viable in the first year, plus what's been allocated or some portion allocated to the offshore with the historic allocation. Is there a market for that much fish right now to be in redfish to be sold? Like, I understand there may be, and that's a bit of a question according to DFO, processing capacity, but is there really a market to sell that? Because I understand there's millions of pounds already frozen that hasn't been able to be sold.
On the long run, I firmly believe there's going to be a market with increasing demand for fish and seafood, the worldwide demand for redfish and for fish and seafood. I firmly believe that this fish can be sold at a very fair price somewhere once we have put it on the market. So the answer is yes, there is a market. There probably is one now, but it needs to be developed because it's a new product.
But even the experimental quota the last couple of years that has been allocated hasn't been caught, and primarily because doesn't seem to be a market for it. Is that not the reason?
Yeah, well, one processor told me last year or the year before that you would need at least there would be 100,000 tons. Might be too much this year, but what we've had in the last few years was not even enough to send a couple of containers to Asia or something like that. So it was not enough to develop. You need a minimal amount to develop a market. You need to prove to people that you can send them a significant amount of fish. The other thing is that the scientific quota is for just for that, for projects and science to advance science. It's not necessarily meant for commercial. Well, the fish is sold, obviously, but it's not necessarily meant to develop a market. You need to use it to advance science. So that's why those are the reason for why the quotas have.
Thank you, Mr. Elmott. We will move on now to the Mr. Cormier again for 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur Lantang.
Thank you, Mr. Lantang. I want us to go back to what we were talking about, the type of assistance. Even if you were to receive 300,000 tons, fishery starting, we don't know if you are going to be able to sell, what the price is, and so on. I would like you to tell us whether yes or no, will you be able to provide us with figures on what you believe you need for your respective harvesters? I'm talking about owners to start with. Will you be able to give us figures, give the figures to the advisory committee, to the department? Will you be able to provide that? Answer, yes. Once we know how many tons we will be getting yes, we can then do the math. Yes, so my answer is yes. Perfect. Now, looking at the other types of assistance, if we go even further, Mr. Lantin, you are part of an association that brings together crab harvesters as well. You have cleaned up your association and all that. Is it something that shrimp harvesters could do? Could we send harvesters to the sea to take care of cleanup? Is that the kind of assistance that could be part of the main package? Absolutely so. The crab harvesters themselves will tell you that shrimp harvesters have boats that are better equipped for that type of work. So the answer for your question is yes, it's possible to do that. Perfect. Mr. Elema, talking about the same type of gear, scientific data. We had the Environment Commissioner who testified and said that DFO had done a terrible job. I don't know if it's the right adjective, but they did a bad job to come up with stock numbers. Could the scientific data be part of the package required to send harvesters to the sea to do the work, including scientists? Do you need that kind of assistance? Absolutely. We've been offering or asking DFO to work with them to collect data to help them supplement their data, because their own scientists say that they don't have enough information because there are years for which they have no information. So the answer is yes, we are able to do so. We can do it. It's going to be very good for science. Mr. Lantin, back to you. If harvesters want to have a certain number of tons or pounds, individual quotas versus competitive quotas, there's a major difference between the two. Could you quickly explain to us what it means when we talk about a competitive quota or individual quotas? If there are competitive quotas, is it more complicated for the harvesters? That's very easy to answer. Just to obtain funding, let me give you two examples. For funding, if you go to your financial institution, you ask for 100,000, 200,000 to run your fishery, and they ask you, do you have an allocation? No, we have a competitive quota. They tell you, bye, you come back later. So you obtain no financing with that. Secondly, another perfect example, and it's something we experienced last spring. The harvester takes his boat to the water and there's a problem. Competitive quota. He cannot say, I have a problem with my engine, it has to be repaired, so I need to go back to fish. No, you receive no funding to repair your boat. With a competitive quota, you cannot receive financing. So they need individual quotas to be able to obtain financing. Perfect. I don't have much time left. But I know that what happened is not working for you. I know that that's not what you were expecting. But there's a 10% that is there. But listen to there's a question I asked. We heard about possible additional quotas, but we need you around the table. We need you at those advisory committee meetings. We need your ideas. I think the minister is very open to looking into all those options. So we need figures. We need a big package to find out how we can help the owners. Let's not forget the crew members, those working in the factories, all those who depend on the fishery, all those who depend on the redfish harvesting in the future, and those who rely on shrimp harvesting. So we need all those details that the committee needs to make recommendations and that the government also needs for the minister to be able to make decisions.
That's over your 5 minutes, actually, so we'll move now again to MP Debien for 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup, monsieur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We've identified a number of solutions. Last week, there was the Bloc Québécois arranged a round table with lots of harvesters, shrimp harvesters, crab harvesters from all over Quebec. A number of issues were raised on the way the department works and the lack of consideration, the lack of a listening ear. Next week at that consultation table, do you think that you are being listened to? Do you think that you have enough influence to help review quotas, for the quotas to be reviewed in your favor so that they can stop relying on the historic quotas? Madame Desbiens, the first comment I would like to make, and that gets back to the question that Mr. Cormier asked. We even proposed to the department that we set up a working table to consider all what Mr. Cormier just talked about a while ago. We are still waiting for an answer. It's been 2 years that we've been making that request. It's as if we are talking to a wall. They listen to us, they tell us they've heard us, but nothing happens. Now, to come back more specifically to the advisory committee to answer your question more specifically, we do not have great trust in those tables because there's no true exchange that should take place around a round table where everybody accepts to contribute. Everybody has his position. DFO, civil servants are there. They hardly speak. It's the person who is chairing the meeting that speaks. That's it. That's all. A report comes up. We don't even see the report. So we don't even know what has been prepared in Ottawa. We are being told that they have noted our ideas, but we have no evidence to justify that. When on Tuesday this week we had DFO officials that you interviewed, personally, I've never heard so many lies per minute. If you want to know what I think, I've never seen such a gang of liars lying to your face. If you're shocked, well, you've heard me. That's what I wanted to say. Now,
Right on the time for MP Desbiens. We'll move on now to 2.5 minutes to MP Barron, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy this round. I'm going to be passing my time on to Madame Desbiens. Thank you.
Merci infiniment, ma collègue.
Thank you very much, Ms. Barron. Much appreciated. Mr. Illiman. Yes. Let's follow up. We couldn't hear you finish. I would continue in the same vein as Mr. Lantagne. You asked whether we have the impression that we are being heard at the advisory meetings. Unfortunately, we are told this is what has been decided. That's the atmosphere. Now, in the specific case of the redfish, we think that the solution will be to revise the percentages of allocations to the different fleets for the benefit of the shrimp harvesters. We think that is a situation that cannot be explained, be it for sustainable fishery criteria and for protecting the ecosystem. Yes, we are still hoping. We hope the decision will change, but we need help. Now, to conclude, question. Well, there are people who received historic quotas who had to be here today. They are not here today, so we would have liked to hear them. And we're also missing the Minister of the Environment or the Department of the Environment to come and tell us what they think. What do you think that we have to listen to all these people tomorrow? This morning, we had a zone called the Gully, and there was a boat around there. Does this concern you? There are problems, definitely, with the return of the big boats around the Gulf, whether it has to do with catches, the impact on the sea, the impact on the ecosystem in general. Yes, that concerns us, not only because we are representing shrimp harvesters and we are from the Maritimes, there's a reason for which those big boats have not come to our region since the 90s. I don't claim to be impartial, but there are people who are impartial who are really concerned about the return of those boats. If by accident, during our activities, we encounter a boat fishing cod, there could be irreparable damage done to those species, because we are not talking about resources but species. So there is a concern on the potential impact on the ecosystem. That has nothing to do with what we're seeing today.
Concludes this hour of testimony. I want to thank both witnesses for your expert testimony today, and thank you for your time for appearing. We will suspend for a few minutes while we transition to our next round of witnesses.
Merci Jean, merci Patrick.
Merci.
Salut.
So welcome back, everyone, and welcome to our second panel today. We have on Zoom, as an individual, Dominique Robert, Professor of and Canada Research Chair in Fisheries Ecology at the Institut de Sciences de la Mer, Institut de Québec et Rimouski. Also from the cooperatives, the Capitans Proprietaires de la Gaspé, Claudio Bernaches, pardon me for the pronunciation, and from the Fish Food and Allied Workers Union, Jason Springle, the Secretary-Treasurer. Thank you for taking the time to appear today. You will each have 5 minutes or less for your opening statement, and we will start the opening statements with Mr. Dominique Robert, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Merci. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I would like to thank all members of the committee for receiving me here. I am Professor and Canada Research Chair in Fisheries Ecology at the Institut des Sciences de la Mer at the Université du Québec à Rimouski. Since 2018, my research team has been working in collaboration with Fisheries and Oceans Canada researchers to study the ecology of the redfish resurgence in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. The aim of this research is to understand the environmental factors that control redfish recruitment, diet composition, growth, and movements in the Gulf. I therefore consider that it's a topic that I know very well. I was first of all asked to comment on the scales used to allocate the redfish quota in relation to the critical situation faced by shrimp harvesters. The 10% share of the 25,000 tons overall quota allocated to shrimp harvesters was considered very disappointing, and I understand their disappointment given that once this 2,500 ton allocation is divided among the 80 existing shrimp fishing licenses, it only represents about 70,000 pounds per license, a quantity that will not allow a captain to make a profit from this fishery. Many observers deplore the fact that, like it was the case in the past, the offshore sector got the lion's share of the fishery with 58.69% of the total allowable catch. However, I have the impression that it would have been difficult for the minister to ignore historical shares in the redfish allocation when setting allocations. One criterion constantly used by the department to establish shares when reopening a fishery or when moving from a competitive fishery to a fleet sharing system is the consideration of historical shares. I have been working for a long time on the Atlantic halibut in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, a species for which the fishery went from marginal during the 1970 to 2000 period to very lucrative from the years 2010. At the time of the rapid resurgence of the stock, it was also necessary to settle on a formula for sharing the quota among 8 fleets, and such formula was established in 2007 based on historical shares. In 2011, Ernst & Young was commissioned to evaluate the sharing scheme. The firm based its analysis on the management of several other stocks and concluded that the consideration of historical shares was appropriate. It was therefore expected that historical shares would be considered for the redfish fishery like they have been for other stocks. With regard to the critical situation faced by shrimp harvesters, even with a substantial increase in their share of the redfish fishery, I feel that the latter could not easily compensate for the disappearance of shrimp. Over the period from 2000 to 2020, shrimp harvesters landed an annual average of around 25,000 tons of shrimp, but the value per unit weight of shrimp is far greater than that of redfish. For example, if you look at the department statistics, in 2021, harvesters received 1.75 cents per pound for shrimp compared with just 50 cents per pound for redfish. This factor of 3.5 implies that the lucrative situation will require annual landings of 87,500 tons of redfish. Such landings are probably not viable in the short term because of the lack of markets for the resource, or sustainable in the long term given the high natural mortality that is causing a rapid decline in the stock. Rapid changes in the waters of the Gulf of the St. Lawrence, including rising temperatures and falling oxygen levels, will lead to other difficult situations. The Greenland halibut stock can be expected to keep decreasing rapidly or collapse in the short term, and some snow crab stocks will likely follow in the midterm as the system warms up. The current shrimp fishery crisis could quickly spread to other fisheries, a situation that could further hurt the economies of the 5 coastal communities, the 5 coastal provinces. For these reasons, I recommend that the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans extends the scope of the present study beyond redfish quota allocations to identify a range of solutions to, first of all, support shrimp harvesters in the short term, and two, increase the resilience of the fisheries sector in the longer term by establishing strategies to prevent the future crises that are profiling on the horizon in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So that's perfect. Now we'll go to Mr. Claudio Bernatchez for 5 minutes, please, or less.
Thank you, Mr. President. Pour le besoin de l'exercice, je vais me référer.
I will be referring to DFO data. First of all, in 2019, amendments were made to the Fisheries Act to create a framework for conservation and protection of fish and its habitat in 3 ways: ensuring the protection of fish and its habitat and integrating tools required to do so, providing certainty to the industry, to interveners, and lastly, to promote long-term sustainability of aquatic resources. But I'll come back to that. Following scientific research done in 2015, 2016 policy on redfish stated that the arrival of cohorts of redfish would clearly have a significant impact on the ecosystem of the region, particularly increased predation on small invertebrates and fish. The same year, the scientific notice published in 2016 for shrimp talked about a significant increase in redfish as something harvested. A few years later, 2018, a notice on redfish said that redfish harvesting will have significant impact on the ecosystem. Increasing predation will contribute to a drop in the abundance of Nordic shrimp and from the St. Lawrence Gulf. Mr. Chair, there were 2 years of inaction. Nothing happened, and then there was the scientific notice of 2020/19, which said that scientific data had revealed that redfish represented 85% of the biomass captured compared to 15% in 2015. This biomass for redfish is unprecedented and could have significant ecological impacts on other species, whereas the government of Canada is still silent on all that. So how do we sound the alarm when it comes to the impact of the redfish on shrimp and other species? Our scientists came back with notice number 2023 saying that the consumption of Nordic shrimp quintupled, increased by five times between 2017 and 2021. And this reflects the long-term growth of redfish when you compare it to the other cohorts. So these same scientists feel that the consumption of shrimp by redfish increased to 213,000 tons in 2021, 38 times more than what was recorded in shrimp harvesters in 2023, which increased to 5,000 tons or so. Since then, the industry, together with MPO managers, DFO managers came up with a way to ensure the sustainable harvesting. But in spite of that, there's nothing left to fish. Ironically, last month, we learned that redfish stocks were also in danger in the short term, even before the commercial fishery starts. Mr. Chair, how can the government of Canada, since 2016, how has it taken up its responsibility to protect shrimp harvesting and protect other species that are also affected? What measures have been taken to promote the long-term sustainability of these species? And how Have the announcement of the redfish quotas provide predictability to independent harvesters and to coastal communities in the St. Lawrence area? Mr. Chair, many interveners from the industry are ready to collaborate to the development and integration of an ecosystemic approach that would ensure an integrated management of fisheries in Canada without partisanship for the benefit of our sea and coastal communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bernatchez. We'll now go to Mr. Jason Springle for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the committee for taking the time to hear from the Fish, Food and Allied Workers Union today. Our union represents over 14,000 working people in the province of Newfoundland and Labrador, the vast majority of whom are employed in a seasonal fishing industry. I'm here today on behalf of the 4R Gulf of St. Lawrence shrimp and otter trawl fleet based on the west coast and the northern peninsula of our province. The majority of this fleet of owner-operators live at least 3 to 4 hours from the next major center. They live in a rural, culturally important way of living that is based around the inshore fishery. This fishery, via northern shrimp for the past couple decades and longer, has provided a modest and sustainable standard of living to the region. However, climate change and changing water temperature have resulted in an ecosystem shift. The northern shrimp resource has declined drastically in recent years, while redfish populations have grown substantially and have become a major predator of the shrimp. These harvesters have no other fisheries in which to diversify their business and have to put considerable effort into preparing for a return to redfish as a just transition. Without redfish, this fleet has no future. Many are facing bankruptcy if they are not given a viable path forward, and the path was available and wasted with Minister Laboutier's January 26 decision. Allocating the entire coastal-based fleet less than 25% of Unit 1 redfish is a far cry from the at least 50% needed to ensure financial solvency and economic sustainability for the region. Nearly 60% of the share will go to corporate-owned offshore fleet, a small group of factory freezer draggers that will not land or process product in Canada. Rather than the 30 or so in our province and others, as you have heard here in Quebec, New Brunswick, and throughout Unit 1, independent owner-operators that support the sustainability of resource-dependent coastal communities. The allocation key announced for the emerging Commercial 1 unit redfish fishery reflects that of the historical redfish fishery of the 1970s and 80s, which is not comparable to present day. Today, the offshore sector is fundamentally different, with vessels now designed to replace onshore processing with factory freezer equipment to process seafood at sea. This was not the case in the 70s and 80s. It is important to emphasize that the landings of the offshore fleet are not subject to minimum processing requirements. They concentrate profits with other corporations and not workers, and the offshore is already the largest quota holder for fisheries in Canada. In contrast, every vessel in the inshore fleet is a small business on the water that is operating under the federal owner-operator requirements, as well as under provincial legislation that requires that all landings must undergo primary processing at an onshore facility within the province. A majority allocation to the offshore not only denies inshore harvesters of opportunities, but also denies hundreds of onshore plant workers meaningful work and adjacent communities of crucial tax revenues, severing the community's connection to the resource almost entirely. Our union believes the minister has very clearly failed in her responsibility under the Federal Fisheries Act by not prioritizing social, economic, and cultural factors, as well as the preservation and promotion of the independence of independent license holders. As cited in 1977 by the Honorable Romeo LeBlanc, a man that's known as the greatest Minister of Fisheries in our history, for our organization and members. He was Liberal Minister of Fisheries and Oceans in a speech explaining his decision to ban offshore vessels from outside the Gulf, from being allowed to fish inside the Gulf. And a quote, Mr. LeBlanc, who gets first crack at these fish? Here, I must say that I have a clear bias for the inshore fisherman, not because of some romantic regard, not because of his picture on the calendars, but because he cannot travel far after fish, because he depends on fishing for his income, because his community, in turn, depends on fisheries being protected. DFO has been outspoken on their commitment to ensuring sustainably managed fisheries. However, no such work has been undertaken by the offshore to establish viable harvesting methods that do not impact other valuable fisheries and habitat in the Gulf. Over the last decade, inshore harvester organizations in the Gulf of St. Lawrence have contributed hundreds, if not thousands of hours towards developing a sustainable redfish fishery for the inshore fleet. Our union has worked with harvesters via funding through the Atlantic Fisheries Fund to develop sustainable gear modifications and practices to nearly eliminate Atlantic halibut bycatch to demonstrate ocean stewardship. In conclusion, without an alternative fishery, any reduction in access to northern shrimp has a direct and detrimental effect to communities on the west coast, northwest coast of our province. The 4-hour Gulf of St. Lawrence shrimp and otter trawl fleet has the capacity, along with our colleagues that you've heard from here, to land in the entire redfish quota and the innovation from the experimental fishery to do so skillfully. To summarize, we believe a reversal of this decision is warranted to ensure fish stocks are managed to the benefit of those who live adjacent to the resource and for the betterment of Canadian communities and also Canadian workers. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Mr. Spingle. It was a little bit over time, but I think that's okay. We'll move on to our first round of questions now with Mr. Small starting off, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to the witnesses for taking part in our study here. My question, Mr. Chair, is to Mr. Spingle. First off here, Mr. Spingle, I was an independent inshore fisherman myself, owner-operator, like a lot of the folks that you represent. Can you paint a picture of what's going on in the 4-hour fleet right now that you represent?
Yes, thank you for your question, MP Small. I mentioned that this fleet were the basis for the fishery on the Northern Peninsula for many years now, and provided the most of the processing work, or a good portion of it. But as you probably know, but I will just highlight that the shrimp stocks have been declining precipitously. And to quote our chairperson, Mr. Rendell Genge, who was one of the first harvesters to ever fish shrimp in the Gulf in the late 60s, that even though we saw a decline in the past, really, 18 months, no one could have ever figured that the drop would have been so quick, so fast. But people have been borrowing against their savings. They've been borrowing against, from the institutions, the financial institutions. Some of them made investments a few years ago when DFO implemented combining to try to stay in, to try to secure a future. But right now, and I've had conversations with basically each and every one of these individuals as a group, as well as individuals, and many people will not make it through 2024 without some help, and some might not make it anyway. But it's a very bleak situation, and for a proud group of harvesters, it's like I said, that supported their communities in the region for so long. It is difficult to see, particularly that I've worked with them for 20 years of my career.
So would you say the rise in the redfish stock has decimated their livelihood from shrimp? Is that a fair statement?
There's definitely a very, very strong correlation, and the redfish are staying further to the north. Maybe we know temperature is a factor, but I've been to most of the assessments up until the last one. We know that there's particularly juvenile shrimp in the bellies of these redfish, and they're just getting at the size now where they're going to consume, even at a higher rate, the shrimp. And there's another telling factor with the surveys that basically it's the smallest area in the Gulf, the estuary. I'm sure everyone here is familiar with it. But if you look at the overlap redfish and shrimp from that survey, basically the only place where the shrimp are kind of holding their own is in the estuary, and that's the only place in the deep waters of the Gulf where there are no redfish. For whatever reason, the redfish don't want to inhabit there. So that's a very telling, and that's from DFO's own work, for example. That's a very telling picture to me. That's hard to argue with that correlation. So, you know, no doubt about it. I don't think there's a doubt in anyone's mind that redfish predation is the single biggest factor as to the decimation of the shrimp resource.
So it's fair to say that redfish are putting shrimp harvesters out of business right now.
I think that's a very fair statement to say that's the biggest contributing factor, yes.
So, you know, the current government, with its 6 consecutive fisheries ministers, has had a lot of time. They've known that redfish has been proliferating for the last 8 years. Are you satisfied with what the government's done in preparation for what we see today in the bloom of the redfish fishery to prepare, to help prepare harvesters and processors to be ready and in terms of what they've done to add value, landed value to that product, have they done everything that they that they could have done? Sorry.
No, I mean they put out the Atlantic Fisheries Fund, and that was certainly a help. But there was no work led by DFO. The work on bycatch, on species split, you know, it is a complicated issue, but there are 2 species there, and they kind of one is much less abundant than the other, so you have to have a plan for that. We have Atlantic halibut, which you heard has exploded. That's so important. It's a big part of a lot of fixed gear harvesters in the Gulf of St. Lawrence and their livelihoods. So we've done a lot of work, but we led that work. And when I say we, harvesters, the FFAW, we work with processors, and I know some of my colleagues on the line here in New Brunswick and Quebec have worked on the same issues as well, and we work with Dominic Robert to learn a lot about. Dominic is good to see him here, a colleague that turned into a friend here, and appreciate seeing him on. We've done groundbreaking work on Atlantic halibut to find out where they spawn in the wintertime and where they inhabit. But the bottom line is, no, the DFO did not do the work in P small, and there could have been more support given for us to do more work, and there's still more work that needs to be done here. This will be a transition.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Small. That's your 6 minutes. We will move on now to Mr. Cormier once again.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Benache, thank you for being here. I think you heard the former panel, Mr. Lantaigne and Mr. Element. How many tons of shrimp? Fleets of shrimp from all provinces. How many tons of redfish will be required? I can't give you the numbers now because what we're trying to find out are ways of going through the current crisis we're facing. And Mr. Cormier, you know that the redfish will not resolve the problems we have this year in 2024. And that's why I asked you the question, because we've heard figures from left and right, and since the decision was made, you said you were expecting more, but you have just said that we know very well that even if the fishery were to open this year, there are still going to be difficulties. So the question I put to your other colleagues before was, what do you expect as an interim plan? What do you need? Do you need permits, guarantees, and so on? Have you shared what you need with Minister Louboutin, with the public servants? Have you shared the figures you expect, your estimates? The first thing I'd like to say is not so much an addition of quotas that should be done. In the first part of the allocation should go to the harvesters, so we avoid the disastrous allocations that were announced last January. That will be the first solution, because that will allow maybe the bankers to tell our shrimp harvesters that maybe you need more guarantees. Now, for other solutions, and unfortunately this was not discussed before within the government of Canada, I think 2016, 2018, people are being asked to come up with solutions. I've not been in the industry for a long time, but other letters have been sent. It's as if the government of Canada is not taking this issue seriously, and 6 different people have been appointed at the head of this very important department, which is very important for many communities over the past few years. So what do we require? We need to be serious when we are consulting the industry. We need to listen to them, and we need to really try to find a solution. So now, I'm talking about the committee. You've talked about submitting your needs 5 or 6 times. Could you please table the needs you need for the interim plan? For Quebec shrimp harvesters, we need about $26 million to come up with about 50% of the permit. But I know that the government wants to reduce the number of players, but we need to ask, when we ask questions, we need clear answers as well. Perfect. I only have 6 minutes, so I want to be sure that my message has been understood. You need to state your needs. I understand that permits have to be bought back. All the problems will not be resolved. You want to keep people in the industry, the crew members, those working in the factories, and also all that. But very quickly, a while ago, you said that the minister should not have relied on historic quotas. But let's put things in perspective. It's not Mr. Benaje or Mr. Spingle an attack against shrimp harvesters. I would like us to look at the global picture, what could happen in the future. Let's say that shrimp harvesting ends, and in 15 years, shrimp harvesting comes back in great force, and we have about 100,000 tons of shrimp. Can a future DFO minister say, I will respect historic quotas, but you also have crab harvesters and other harvesters that are in difficulty, so we need to give them 10%, as we are just doing now with the redfish? Could we do that? Mr. Robert? Sorry. These are decisions that could be taken. Right now, the person occupying the position of minister has the veto to take the decision or any possible decision. But from what we've seen during the last fishery, historic quotas are a significant factor. So that is what I said. Some quotas should be allowed for harvesters in difficulty. Do you think that some fleets should be prioritized?
Sure.
Coastal fleets. Inshore fleets should be prioritized. If their resources are in difficulty, then there's no safeguard, and that's the major difference. So, yes, but I would look into the long term. Your FOPO committee should look at strategies for increasing the resilience of coastal fisheries, because right now it's a major difficulty, and other fisheries will take the same direction. Thank you.
No, merci.
Mr. Cormier, thank you. That's your 6 minutes. We'll move on now to MP Debienne for 5 minutes, or 6 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Merci à nos...
Thank you, Chair. I would like to thank our precious witnesses. Mr. Bernacci, I found your description of the situation since 2016 very interesting, and it highlights the fact that for a long time we've seen the various factors that have contributed to the fisheries crisis in Quebec and the Maritimes. We saw this coming. And how can the current system of allocation of quotas, consideration of measures, of ground knowledge, to what extent is what happening at DFO right now no longer working, looking at the reality we are dealing with? Because we are realizing that that is not working. In this context, and after listening to Mr. Robert, who made some interesting comments saying that we need to work on resilience amongst the coastal harvesters, to what extent don't we need, because some scientists will also sound the alarm, so to what extent is it not necessary, or is it necessary to delve into the study of the allocation criteria and historic quotas, considering that the significant variation from climate change, predators, moving biomass, and so on and so forth? Given this context, is it not necessary as we speak to save the boat and to think about a new way of doing things?
Je vous dirais, Madame Desbiens, que si on...
We need to all, if we don't do that, we'll be contributing to the collapse of fishery. The culture here is the same as when the redfish, when the Basque came here years back. Even now, these cultures still exist, where people just want to fill boats, fill factories, and so on. We have not learned from the past. We are trying to repeat the mistakes of the past. And now the fish industry, through permits have become the main problem now. Here in the coast, you have permits that are being sold at ridiculously high prices. This makes no sense to to pay such amounts of money to be able to carry out an activity. Furthermore, I've heard things today, and I wonder, we are not even taking the trouble to have a general idea. A while ago, we talked about recovering the phantom boats, and we're like, should we send harvesters in there? That could be done, but these existing programs are already recruiting people doing the work. So now we are saying we are going to try to resolve a problem by creating another one. Let's take the time to have a general picture of the situation so that once and for all, we can have an ecosystemic approach that will enable the decision makers to carry out integrative management, so that once and for all, we listen to science, we listen to the industry, and we come up with policies, the right policies in the industry. Thank you, Mr. Bernacci. That is music to my ears. I don't know what else to tell you. Now, to be heard by DFO and the government, we saw demonstrations last Tuesday. We were at the Fourchette Bleu in Malbaie with my leader and other MPs. And we heard the trouble of harvesters. Not only are we affecting an entire economy, I know that it's not always easy to quantify. But there's an entire socioeconomic ecosystem that is associated to this industry. Does the government understand the impact their decision has had on the coastal communities, in your opinion? Madame Desbiens? I am kind of disillusioned because the current minister, who is from our region, who knows the industry very well, because we were very happy when she was appointed. She grew up amongst harvesters, and others could corroborate. Jason Spinkle could say the same. We thought she was going to help promote coastal communities in her announcements. And to date, Madame Desbiens, I do not believe that the announcements that she made on the 26th of January came from her. That's the extent to what the situation has gone. Yes, there are people who understand, but when it comes time to take the decisions and understanding what are the interests taken into account, is it socio-economic interest? Do we still want to consider these communities that are scattered throughout the country? Or are you looking at Canada's electoral map and looking at the red, blue, yellow colors, and then you do your math to try to find out what the impact of the decisions are going to be during the next elections? What is the seriousness given to our industry? Thank you, Mr. Benache.
Desbiens, we'll move now to Madam, Ms. Barron for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. My first question, first of all, welcome to the witnesses. Thank you for being here. And my first question is for Mr. Spingle. Welcome, Mr. Spingle. Nice to see you again. I wanted to ask you about the, let me find the right question here, the plants, the shrimp plants in Newfoundland. And we know that they have huge benefits to the municipalities next to them. And I'm wondering if you can share, do these plants have the capacity to process redfish?
They absolutely do. And I've talked to processors. These plants have the capacity to, with some, I think, reasonable investment in the machinery, in the plants, but the workers have that, expertise as well to work on either shellfish or ground fish. And, we have in these plants, like in Port au Choix, probably the first shrimp plant in Newfoundland and Labrador, there's over 100 workers there. And, redfish could really be, as I would see, as, for August, really the primary time, right up until January, February. So we're talking for most of the year here, almost full-time work with redfish in particular. So, that's I really appreciate the question. But I also want to say that we did have with the experimental fishery and one of our plants, we don't represent members in every plant, but I had a call just a couple of days ago from our chairperson at Beathic Fish on the northeast coast, who actually, their plant bought some of the experimental redfish in December of last year, and that was a real benefit to some of the workers with the crab fishery being delayed and everything this year. So we have the plants, we have the boats, and we have the expertise, and that what would be very, very difficult here, besides looking off Port aux Basques and actually see, because we don't have to go hundreds of miles here. We're talking about 3 or 4 hours of steaming, we call it, travel in these boats that travel about 10 knots. We're talking about being on the fishing grounds. So to stand up near Port aux Basques on a clear day and have to see a factory freezer fishing is going to make this very, very difficult. Further to that, my fear is, and I wouldn't be a bit surprised if, we have to get this changed, but that the people that are going to fish it in the offshore are going to look to not use one of the factory freezers that are already fishing in Atlantic Canada. They're going to go look to get one built or buy one, overseas at $150 million. And furthermore, be looking for government money to probably fund that. Go to Port au Choix, go to Rivière-Renard, go to Caroquet, and you'll see the boats that are there ready with some minor investment or reasonable investment in gear, a new net, maybe some sounding equipment, some, as was said, got in previously, some on-deck, minor on-deck adjustment to bring in this quality fish to these plants and really be a transition to the shrimp. And the final point I would say is, look, not as much, it may not be as much a pound. I appreciate that. I think Dominic had a good point there. And that's why we need a transition plan, like was done for the auto industry a few years ago. Geez, I thought, listening to the television, that GM and Ford and all these, picking on either one, but, they were done if they didn't get the government investment, and they deserved it. They should have had it. And they got it, and they got back on the right track, and things went again. So that happens in major industries. My understanding is that what our governments are there for. But why reinvent the wheel? We have everything in place to do it properly, as was outlined very clear by Claudio. And why would we, other than to say you don't see a future for these communities, if that's what you're saying, you should say it, the people that are making these decisions. If not, let's work together and make a transition that'll allow us to continue with a good economy and our way of life. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spingle. You just answered a lot of my questions there in your response, so that's great. I guess perhaps could you just reinforce what the impacts would be of these plants to municipalities if these plants are not processing shrimp, if they're not processing redfish? What would be the impacts on local communities of that happening?
These are often the sole source in these communities. Anyone would say, contributing hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars in revenue and tax revenue through the work that they do. And what you will see is a diminishment of not only the community that the plant is in, and is the surrounding area as well. So a deterioration in all infrastructure, and really, tourism is, I agree, tourism is so important. And we were tourists. We went up to the demonstration, and I've been on the South Shore of the Gaspé Peninsula before, but we went around the northern I was told by my colleagues how beautiful it was, but I got to say it's right up there with parts of Newfoundland, for example. But if you take Rivière Renard out of the picture, or Port au Choix out of the picture, and many others, are you going to have as a vibrant tourist economy? I would say you won't. It'll be a diminishment. So it's all part of a package. It's all part of a way of life. And without being too philosophical, I think our cities are great. I love to visit them. But we're a better country, and I know there's going to be some transition, but we're a better country because of our rural communities. Some of them do fish, some of them mine, some of them do forestry. We're a much better country, and we cannot lose that. And this decision points to something different here. And I'm not sure that some people see it. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spingle. Thank you, MP Barron. We'll move on to the next round. Mr. Perkins for 5 minutes.
Oh, I thought we were going to committee business. Okay. Just a sec. I got to get my clock going, Mr. Chair. Yes, I know, but, I tend to go on, so I like to keep track myself. So thank you, witnesses. Mr. Spingle, I'd like to ask you to start with perhaps, is there any way to manage or work in the fishery unless you've got stable quota allocations that allow harvesters, regardless of their size, to make investments to fish?
Well, I think, the fishery is like any entrepreneurial business based on a commodity. There's ups and downs. There's ups and downs in the fishery, and but I'll quote, again, speech from our chair at the rally in Grand Riviere there last week. That said, he's faced difficult times because of quota reductions and or price reductions, or and interest rates and fuel rates. But he's never really been faced with the situation where he's been told, no, basically you're done. So, the other element I think, appreciate where you're coming at there, Mr. Perkins. It's good to see you again as well. Is that, this fishery closed in 1994. And what I will say is, again, is that there's a group of people based in, and I think that goes back to Minister LeBlanc's decision. There's a group of people that have lived in the Gulf. That's who they are. That's where they're from. The Gulf of St. Lawrence, the offshore were given an opportunity to move. I would say, to quote a former DFO bureaucrat on another issue, they were rewarded handsomely. They were rewarded handsomely with the resources in the southern Labrador Sea, shrimp and turbot.
As you know, I just have limited time and have a couple
Okay.
other questions for you, if I could.
So
thank you.
Really quickly, I would say, there's always some risk, but people deal with the ups and downs. But when you take away, the lifeline.
No, I get that, but I want to follow up with my next question, which is, DFO has been doing science on this for a while, and like most things, DFO and the minister seem to act at a pace that's slower than the movement of a glacier. And in this case, the redfish science quota, or the redfish biomass, was estimated in 2019 at 4,300 kilotons, and now it's down to about 2,500, a 42% decline according to the latest science, while DFO dithered over the last 5 years trying to figure out what to do. So I'm wondering, in all of this that you've been at it, why is it that it's taken so long for DFO to recognize that there was a fishery here that was available to harvesters from both the inshore and offshore that could be harvested, but we're 5 years since they hit that level, and they still haven't done anything?
Yeah, I guess we were all hoping that the size would be more of what was known about the biology of the species. In saying that, I think that we probably should have started developing it more for sure earlier on, and certainly we need to start developing it now.
They're supposed. The DFO is supposed to manage the fishery by a diversity of the ocean, a balanced sort of idea and way, so that things don't get out, and we harvest things so that one species isn't impacting the other. But it looks like in the 5 years that they've been waiting, that what they allowed to happen was a decimation of the shrimp fishery while they couldn't figure things out. How many times, whether it's 30 years ago with the northern cod and all these things, do we have to go through this in Atlantic Canada where DFO can't seem to get their act straight until it's too late?
Yes, no doubt there's a lag there for sure. And we're accused of being too aggressive sometimes, the industry, I would say. But certainly there's often a lag. And I think the poetic justice, or not the justice, I guess the opposite term here is that we put on Nordmore grates to eliminate bycatch, to protect Atlantic halibut and redfish and all these species in 1994. And that very technology that promoted conservation, is now part of the reason, arguably, that shrimp harvesters are at a commercial breaking point, so to say.
Thank you, Mr.
What should the tax be?
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. If he can answer back in another round, we now move on to, it looks like it's Mr. Cormier's show. Oh, Mr. Morrissey. Okay, thank you. Go ahead for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. My first question is to Professor Robert. Professor, from your research, when did you think the redfish stock in the Gulf reach commercial fishing biomass status?
So, it's a matter of length of the fish. So the length at which redfish can start being fished is 22 centimeters, and that has been reached 3 or 4 years ago for a fair proportion of the large cohorts.
Okay. Again, since you are you're not a fisher or you're not with DFO, from your research, can the stock currently sustain a higher catch ratio than has been announced?
So So the science advice says that the stock could this year be fished, at a much more ratio. But the difficulty is, like what Mr. Spingle has mentioned, it's the idea of being able to extract the resource without catching the other redfish species and without catching other species of commercial interest like the halibut or endangered species. So it would be difficult to increase a lot the quota in a situation where the experience, we're just starting. We don't have the experience, so it would be, I think, difficult to get clean catches the first year.
Okay, thank you. Since this committee will eventually make recommendations on this fishery, would you recommend to this committee to recommend that the inshore fishery should be prioritized on the catch allocation from the amount announced by the minister?
It's difficult for me to say who should be prioritized. If I could give a personal opinion, of course, I worked a lot with inshore fishermen. I know well the fishing communities all around the Gulf of St. Lawrence. I know very well how difficult the situation is.
Professor, who would benefit more, and which group has the least alternative options to survive economically, inshore or offshore?
So right now, it's inshore, given that most harvesters have only quota for one species. So the shrimp harvesters, if they can only fish shrimp, if they cannot fish anymore, of course, they are more vulnerable.
Okay, thank you. In your comments earlier, you, I believe it was you, to extend the scope of this study to examine impacts of climate change on other stocks. What warning signs are you alluding to?
So what I was mentioning is the system keeps warming. It will keep warming in the short term, in the mid-term as well, and the cold water species that we have in the Gulf. Oh.
So, Professor, you're confident that we're on a climate change warming in the Gulf that is unstoppable at the moment?
Yeah, at least in the midterm, we know that it's warming at the surface. That's climate change, but it's warming from the deep layers, from an inflow of the Gulf Stream. So it's warming both at the surface and at the bottom. So the warming is really fast right now. So the cold water species are set to decrease in abundance, which will lead to other crises if we don't do anything.
And these are, I believe you would agree, are the species that are the most valuable to the inshore fishery in Atlantic Canada, correct?
Yeah, with the exception of lobster.
Do you see an impact on lobster?
It's a positive impact. Lobster is a species that reacts positively to the warming, but the cold water species, snow crab, northern shrimp, Greenland halibut, those are in trouble.
Thank you, Professor. My time is up, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Morrissey. We'll move on again to MP Debienne for 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I want to take a minute to make sure that I can speak at the beginning of committee business. Just at the beginning, because it...
Go into committee business. I will see hands raised when we begin committee business.
Parfait. Merci.
Thank you. I'm being told I should read it now. I would like to use my time to table notice of motion considering the study for skills used by DFO to set redfish quotas. The committees would like to call back Madame Sylvie Lapointe, President of the the Fédéral Régional des Pêcheurs to come back and answer questions for 1 hour. The committee invites the Minister of the Environment, Mr. Stephen Guilbeault, to talk for 1 hour to answer questions asked by members of this committee. So it be understood that these two witnesses can appear during the same session, either one witness during the first hour, another witness during the second hour, and this meeting take place before we write the letter following this study. And I would like us to discuss that during committee business in a short while.
As I understand it, you've put the notice on
L'avis de motion.
or motion on notice. Okay, thank you.
Est-ce qu'il me reste du temps?
Do I have any time left? How lucky I am. Thank you, Chair. Now I will turn to Mr. Robert. Mr. Robert, for how long have scientists like you been sounding the alarm about the problem of the rarity of shrimp and the solutions that should have been made since that observation was made for shrimp harvesters that only harvest shrimp? For how long has this been an urgent issue? The shrimp is a species that has been reducing for many years. It's a gradual drop, but we've seen the rarity over the past 3 or 4 years. We saw shrimp being used. There are times when temperatures are warming up, and we have realized that there's a combined effect of climate change and redfish. So, from the time it was observed that the redfish was the major predator, if something had been done, we would be faced with the same problem. As I said, the shrimp was a cold water species, and its abundance will still reduce even in the absence of a predator like redfish. The redfish is simply speeding up the impact that the ecosystem has on shrimp, but clearly with the current warming up, its availability is quickly reducing in the St. Lawrence Gulf. In the future, for example, in 10 years...
Move now to MP Barron for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the information that was just being provided. So perhaps I would like to see the remainder of that answer written and provided to us, if possible, from the previous witness. But my question actually to Mr. Spingle, I've had a question that's been brought to my attention that I'm hoping you might be able to shed some light on, specifically around the problems that may occur from an independent inshore harvester having to lease redfish quotas from the offshore. Can you provide some insights into any problems that may result?
Well, I guess, business, in the business world, it comes down to whoever's willing to fish it for the least amount of money. We see our counterparts in your beautiful province, MP Barron, BC. We've talked to them, colleagues, international conferences, where people have to pay 3/4 of the value of the shore price just to go fishing. And if you can say that people will be fair, but they say that the big debate of business and morality, I suppose, and we know that people are in difficult situation. But besides that, when you have something like halibut, you have some flexibility to at least make some money if you have to buy that quota in the water. But when you're dealing with redfish, which we know right now, well, probably always will be somewhat of a lower value, it's not going to put most of our members in a very good position. And they need, I think there can be some flexibilities for sure, but they need their own allocations, right? To all the independent owner-operators that are now going out of business because of shrimp, they need a significant portion of their own allocations to make this, to have an opportunity for viability here.
Thank you, Chair. 4 seconds. And my question is too big to fit into those 24 seconds, so I'm going to let it go and thank the witnesses.
14
please.
seconds.
Thanks.
Okay, I want to thank the witnesses for appearing today, and thank you for your testimony. We will suspend now for a few minutes to go to move to committee business. Committee business, and on the notice of motion or notice of meeting, we had drafting instructions as the first item of business. I saw Mr. Perkins with his hand up.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to put forward a motion that is
we were here to discuss the.
In committee business, you can move a motion in committee business.
Well, no.
You guys did it 2 weeks ago. You did. So if I could speak, Mr. Chair, on my motion that I'm proposing, is it's a good try, though. I appreciate it. Given that the important study that we've done now, we're doing now on redfish, actually interrupted our emergency study on elvers, I just want to make sure we get back to it. So I'm going to propose a motion that reiterates the motion that we already passed in terms of the witnesses we would appear, which includes the RCMP, Canadian Border Service Agency, CFIA, and an additional, and we asked for the minister as well in that motion, which we all unanimously passed. And I would add, well, we've had a number of people write since then, and there are whistleblowers on the issue that would like to appear in public. So with that, I'd like to move the following motion, that given that the committee passed a motion calling for an emergency study to examine DFO's plan to prevent violence in the Elver fishery, the committee agrees to A, renew its invitation to Aaron O'Gorman, President of the Canadian Border Service Agency, which is responsible for preventing the illegal export of elvers out of our borders. B, renew its invitation to the Commissioner of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Mike Duhame, as the organization responsible for contract policing in Nova Scotia. C, renew its invitation to the Minister of Fisheries, hopefully she'll appear this time, renew the invitation to the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans to appear on the emergency study, to examine departmental plans to prevent the repeated violence and the illegal export of elvers. D, prioritize future regularly scheduled meeting slots towards this study and completion. I believe that would be for the next two meetings or the next two meetings in March when we sit. That those meetings would also contain, 1, whistleblowers working the illegal elver fishery with the knowledge of its operations and organization, crime elements to be conducted in camera. And we've all had emails, I think, from the clerk distributed on those witnesses. And 2, officials from the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, who testimony from the department in our first meeting showed was certifying exports of elvers from the Toronto airport, even though they were illegal. And E, that the committee resume other scheduled business following the completion of the urgent elver study that we interrupted with the redfish study.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. I saw Ms. Barron with her hand up.
Thank you, Chair. A few things. So I'm just noticing that this version again is updated again. We should have put version 2.0, version 4.0, and so on these because I'm starting to get confused now. But I'm noticing there's an addition in the whistleblower section.
No, that's always been there.
It's not on the last version that I have in front of me on paper that was given to me. There's a piece.
It was on the one that was circulated by the clerk. It's always been there. So.
Okay, I'm not seeing it on the version that was given to me. Regardless, I'll have to consider that one point because it's the first time.
It's also that we had that conversation beforehand too, where the whistleblowers could appear.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Oh no. Okay, so
Yeah. Sorry, Mr. Chair.
Sorry, through the chair. If I could clarify, I can see where the miscommunication is happening now. It's not the point around the whistleblower; it's the addition to the whistleblower point that I'm. So it's just the wording's different.
Okay.
Yes,
Oh,
so
okay.
it's not the point.
sorry.
So sorry, thank you, Chair, for allowing us to sort out what we're talking about there. So there's some different wording that's been added to the point. So I just would like to clarify what's being asked here. My understanding was that the original motion, emergency motion on this was to have 2 meetings, which we agreed to as a committee. And my understanding of this motion was that we were agreeing as a committee, or my understanding is that the intention here was to have the meeting that's already been agreed upon, whereby we will have the first half as law enforcement, second half as whistleblowers. Now, with that caveat, I do want to point out that if we're able to get the minister here, which I would like to highlight, it would be great to see the minister here. We're not seeing the minister coming to committees as much as I would like. And so if we can get the minister here to talk about this important issue, I would most definitely support an addition of another hour. Ideally, the minister has already been requested to come for the supplementary estimates, and it would be great to have the minister here for the whole meeting instead of just 1 hour for the supplementary estimates. So I just want to clarify, because the mover of the motion said 2 meetings. Is it in fact 2 meetings that's being asked, or what does that look like? Because it's very broad in the wording of the motion itself. It just says prioritize the future regularly scheduled meetings. I feel like we need to really identify what it is that we are agreeing to with that wording.
Sure. Good points. Yeah. Excuse me. I'm dealing with bronchitis. So the idea would be, I think, the reasonable idea. The original motion, since this repeats it, assumed that the minister would come with officials. She didn't. We just had officials. So that's how that would have been off in one section. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. So what we ended up with was just officials. Normally, we would have had the minister and officials for an hour and then officials. That would have been the normal case. And then the second meeting would have been, on the plan, would have been the law enforcement agencies that were requested. So that's not the way it worked out. So the idea is that the 2 meetings in March, the first one would be, say, for an hour on the what I call the law enforcement issues. So CFIA, RCMP, and CBSA. I haven't put CNP in there because they were here already with the departmental officials. And that a second meeting would be, say, with an hour with the whistleblowers, or the second hour of that meeting would be with the whistleblowers. And then the second meeting would be with the minister. And I think, given that we've had 3 or 4 requests in for the minister, we could do an hour on Alvers and then the second hour on the estimates, which I think we need to do as well. So, and knocked off. So that would be the intent. I sort of wrote it this way so that sometimes it provides the clerk with a little more flexibility in scheduling. But if you want more precision, that's the thinking behind it.
Mr. Kellaway?
Yeah, I'm the old saying, I'm just a country lawyer. But I'm not even a lawyer. But so I'm just for the country. Yeah, just for me, when I'm reading this, I'm just a little. A bit more clarity would be, I think, good, Mr. Perkins, MP Perkins, just in terms of. So on the 19th, walk through this again with me. So on the 19th, go. Just tell me what yeah. Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Mr.
Thank you.
So 19th would be the first meeting that we're back. Right. The first hour would be RCMP, Canadian Border Service Agency, CFIA. Second hour, whistleblowers. Then on, is it the 21st? The second meeting would be 2 hours with the minister, 1 hour in Alvers, 1 hour in estimates.
Didn't we have two meetings, though? This will be the second meeting on the 19th, correct?
That'll be the second meeting, but the minister, the intent was in the original motion that the minister be here with officials, which she wasn't. And it was said at the time that she would come another time because she couldn't be there at the date that officials were. So I'm just following up on what the commitment was, that she would come on Elvers at another time, even though we had only allocated that. So we've got the time on the 21st to do both, because she should appear on estimates before they have to be reported back to the House.
Any further questions?
Is it possible to just to get 2 minutes for the suspension, just to have a conversation?
If we can keep it short, we do.
2
We
minutes.
have been postponing drafting instructions, so
Yeah.
a very short recess.
So what we would propose is an amendment to Mr. Perkins' motion with respect to the 19th, that the whistleblowers come and other folks other than the minister. The minister would be here for 1 hour on the 21st, and the RCMP and the CBSA the second hour.
Can you go over that again? So what's on the first meeting?
So the 19th would be the whistleblowers.
For 2 hours?
And whomever.
Okay.
Right? The 21st would be 1 hour with the minister, and the second hour would be CBSA and RCMP.
And CFIA?
And CFIA, sorry. Sure.
Madam Barron?
Thank you. So just to clarify, what you're suggesting is that it's the same amount of meetings, but now the minister is not coming. Just to clarify.
On the 19th. She
The
would be here on the
minister would be
21st.
here.
She wouldn't be here on the 19th.
Right.
She'd be out here on the 21st. For 1 hour.
I'm just trying, thank you, Chair. I'm just trying to figure out what exactly the amendment is, because isn't that what we had agreed to in the beginning? So, because at the beginning, we had talked about the law enforcement people, whistleblowers coming, the first meeting. Second meeting, we had talked about minister supplemental C.
Yeah.
And so the
The minister
difference
on
is
the
that
19th is
the entire 2 meetings is taking up one group instead of having 2 groups. Is that the difference? Somebody clarify the difference,
If
please.
Mr. Perkins can clarify?
Yes.
I think, if I understand you right, the first meeting on the 19th would be 2 hours with the whistleblowers, and the meeting on the 21st would be 1 hour with the law enforcement agencies and 1 hour with the Minister on estimates. So, it's and I appreciate what the compromise trying to propose. I just I go back to I don't know if I'm allowed to say this because he's in the chair, but MP Arnold's statement at the last meeting about the challenge we've had in getting the minister to come on issues. We've issued a number of invitations to her, and she's never available. And so we know if she's available on the 21st for 1 hour, she can be available on the 21st for 2 to deal with at least 2 of the 3 or 4 things we've asked her to come on, and she has not come on yet. And I think that's not a lot. She's been minister since the summer, and she's only been here once for 1 hour, which I don't think is enough for ministerial accountability to Parliament. So I would prefer still to do the whistleblowers for an hour, the law enforcement folks for an hour, and then 2 hours on the second meeting with the minister, 1 on Elvers and one on estimates. That's where.
Go ahead, Mr. Morrissey.
Just on a clarification, the minister has been minister for less than a year and has appeared here once. The last minister under the former government appeared twice over her whole term, which considered too.
I don't really care.
I know, nor do I. But the minister, the minister is available. We've had every minister of the 6 we've had has been before this committee on multiple times. And so I agree the minister should be here. The minister would be available to come in on subs. Actually, when she's here, there's nothing stopping anybody from questioning her on items that are there. So, just the point that I find, quite frankly, irritating is that she isn't available. She's been here, and she's been minister less than a year. And again, I'll confirm, the former government for us, the minister under whole term was before the committee twice, over years and years and years and years. Thank you, Chair.
MP Barron, you had your hand up.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying. When I heard that the minister was coming, I thought it meant the minister was coming to talk about Elvers, so that's where my confusion was happening. Thank you for clarifying. I mean, I will, of course, go with the will of the mover of the motion. However, I do want to reiterate that I also agree that having the minister here would be preferable to be able to talk about this issue. And my observation as a newer member of Parliament is I am seeing ministers talking about issues at committees more regularly than what we are seeing at this committee. And so that's my lens of comparison right now, and I feel that the minister should be here talking about this important issue and the issues that we've brought forward before. So I would prefer to see the meeting set up in the original, the way that's been proposed by the mover of the motion.
Mr. Perkins.
And I could propose a compromise, if you like, which is the Elver hour could be split between Elvers and Redfish, if you like. And then do estimates for the second hour.
Is that a formal amendment?
I can't amend my own amendment, my own motions.
Somebody would need it. Could the clerk or the analyst read back where we're at then with the meetings? Or if one of the members can
Maybe a member.
Miss, asking for someone to clarify, but Debian, did you have something?
Oui. Mais moi, j'ai rien contre le fait que
I have nothing against the fact that I can talk about the harvesting crisis with the minister, but I should still have the option to present the notice of motion I raised a while ago. So maybe it could be added later on before instructions are given for the letter to be drafted. My motion is also important, so that could follow that, and then we can end with that before moving on to discuss our regular calendar, to go on with the regular calendar. So I would like to discuss for a few minutes with the minister to talk about the crisis for shrimp harvesters.
Mr. Perkins, are you clear on that? No.
Madame Desbiens wants to move a motion after we're done mine, that's fine.
We have to get through one motion, and is it being amended from what your motion was or not? We have.
I can't amend it, so.
No, but Ms. Barron?
I'm just curious if we feel that it would increase the likelihood of the minister coming if we amend the motion. Otherwise, I don't know if it's worth it. If the minister's not going to come, then the minister's not going to come. I could amend the motion and we can keep amending, but I guess if it's the will of the committee for us to amend the motion and put it out to the minister and see if she's able to come on the issues, I think it'd be great to get some answers around what's happening around the redfish at the same time. So I'd be happy to move the motion for us to have the 1 hour with the minister to talk both about the situation with the Elvers and the redfish.
Is it the will of the committee to pass the motion as it was originally submitted and see what the clerk can do with that and see what the minister can do with that? I see nodding heads around the room, all in favor and none opposed. Okay, the motion is carried. Less than a minute left. At the previous meeting, while I was not in the chair, I suggested that we at least get moving on with the submission of drafting instructions for the IUU study. I don't know what the committee feels at this point, whether we can get that done so that the analysts could work on it during the 4 out of the next 5 weeks that we're not going to be here.
Because we'll spend the time on version 1 anyway.
Our input before they start writing.
Listen, submit some emails.
Yeah.
I don't feel comfortable. I don't feel comfortable.
No,
Okay.
Chair, this was an extremely important, in-depth study.
Oh my geez, really? Oh no.
What? Oh
no.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Oh. Chair, I don't think we have time to deal with
I
it.
take it there's consensus, not consensus around the room to submit drafting instructions, but if we could certainly plan towards that in our next 2 weeks back, if we can perhaps plan at the beginning of a meeting when we come back in 2 weeks to make sure that we get it done. And otherwise, we may not see that report by June.
Chair, I would agree with you. Maybe just consensus at the committee. If you could rephrase and we could agree with it.
If everyone agrees at the beginning, we see if we can start early or extend late, but the first order of business at the next meeting is drafting instructions. All agreed? Mr. Perkins, or Mr. Small, quickly before we have to.
Mr. Chair, I don't see why we can't have our recommendations into the analysts by Friday. We've been sitting on this witness testimony for a month, and the analysts are going to have a 2-week break now and then a 2-week break after. I don't know. I'm not saying the analysts are going to have like a break, not to work at all, but it's a good opportunity for the analysts to move some of this work out of the way and not to have everything piled on and all the demands on translation that we've seen. So can the committee agree that if we have our recommendations in that the analysts can come out with some kind of a version based on what we get into them by Friday coming or next Friday?
I've just been told by the clerk we have a hard stop at 6 o'clock. We're just past that now, so I'm going to have to adjourn.
It's the first draft.
Meeting's adjourned.